Hi, this is Mark Graban, and welcome to episode 217 of Lean Blog Audio. This is a post that was published on July 12th, 2017. The headline reads, "The Conundrum That Is Dr. Deming on Metrics, Measures, and Data." Even almost 25 years after his passing, it's still somewhat popular to quote Dr. W. Edwards Deming, who passed away in 1993, in email signatures or on social media. Sometimes I think he gets misquoted or his quotes get misused, as I've blogged about before, about this popular quote of his: "It's not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory." And if you want to see a link to my blog post about that from a couple years ago, anything else that I'm linking to in the post, you can go to leanblog.org/audio217. So the W. Edwards Deming Institute has a page full of Deming quotes, context, and citations, and I've linked to it. And there's also a more interactive database of quotes on their website. Dr. Deming often gets quoted as saying, "In God we trust, all others bring data." Well, that makes it sound like Deming thought data was everything, but it's unclear if he actually said it. In some discussion on the Deming Institute site, some attribute the quote to others who Deming worked with, and one person claims he never would have said that. Now, Dr. Deming did actually write and say something that sounds like the opposite of the "all others bring data" line. Here's the quote: "The most important figures that one needs for management are unknown or unknowable, but successful management must nevertheless take account of them." And Dr. Deming, in that quote, he cites Lloyd S. Nelson, Director of Statistical Methods for the Nashua Corporation. So again, that quote, I'll just repeat it. "The most important figures that one needs for management are unknown or unknowable, but successful management must nevertheless take account of them." So I want to thank John Hunter and his Curious Cat blog for the citation that the quote there is from Deming's book, Out of the Crisis, page 121. So what are some examples of things that are important but hard to measure? How do you put a number on health or quality of life? Now, you might be able to measure some indicators of health. Some key performance indicators, or KPIs, if you will, might include weight, blood pressure, resting heart rate, things like that. The KPIs that you choose might be different than what someone else might choose. They might choose body fat percentage, HDL cholesterol, A1C levels. I mean, can you measure how much you love someone? Now, what about workplace examples? Are there examples of things that are important but hard to measure? What about customer or patient satisfaction? Well, I mean, sure, you can take surveys or in some industries measure how many customers are repeat customers, but are those just our best approximations of the thing we're interested in tracking or improving? Now, John Hunter has blogged about how the quote, "If you can't measure it, you can't manage it," is often incorrectly attributed to Dr. Deming. He said quite the opposite. The full quote, again, thanks to John, is, "It is wrong to suppose that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. A costly myth." Now, the source for that is Dr. Deming's book, The New Economics, page 35. So how do you reconcile the "all others bring data" quote with data and measures not being the only thing? Where does your organization stand on the importance of data and measures? I'd love to hear what you think. You can go to leanblog.org/audio217 to leave a comment. I'm also going to read here, John Hunter, who I mentioned in the post, left a very lengthy and informative comment, so I'm just going to go ahead and add that here to the podcast. So John, again, in the comment on the blog, he wrote this: "Good post. I think the biggest problem is if people try to find a simple, absolute, completely accurate belief from a short quote. Using data is extremely useful in improving performance. But as Deming quoted Lloyd Nelson as saying, the most important figures that one needs for management are unknown or unknowable." Now, it's pretty easy to understand that Deming believed that organizations failed to use data effectively to improve. He believed that greatly increasing the use of data in decision-making would be useful. He also believed there were specific problems with how data was used, when it was used. Failing to understand variation leads to misinterpreting what conclusions can appropriately be drawn from data. I believe Dr. Deming would have said something like, "In God we trust, all others bring data." I haven't been able to find a source verifying he did say it. Others don't believe he would, referencing the Lloyd Nelson quote and all of Deming's other work showing that Dr. Deming's opinion that data isn't all that matters. I believe they are correct that Dr. Deming wouldn't mean for the quote to be taken literally as a summation of everything he ever said. That doesn't mean he wouldn't use a funny line that emphasized an important message, that we need to stop relying so much on unsubstantiated opinion and instead back up opinion with data, including experiments. Quotes can help crystallize a concept and drive home a point. They are very rarely a decent way to pass on what the author meant. This is why context is so important. But most often quotes are shared without context, and that of course leads to misunderstandings. A funny example of this is the Deming quote, "If you can't measure it, you can't manage it." Well, Deming did actually say that, but without the context, you get 100% the wrong understanding of what he said. Deming's full statement is, "It is wrong to suppose that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, a costly myth." Now, normally the much more context is required to truly understand the author's point, but this is a funny example of how quotes can even be accurate when passed on to you and yet completely misleading because they are taken out of context. So John continues, "I don't see any difficulty understanding Dr. Deming's position on data. Data is very important. Data is very useful. Data can be misused. Certain practices around how we use data lead to problems. We will perform much better by using data properly. We will perform better by using data more frequently than we do not. Trying to use data for those cases where it doesn't work well," Nelson's quote, "will create problems. When using data, it is important to understand the data within the context of the system. Data is very useful, but can lead to suboptimizing the overall system to reach specific targets without an appreciation for the organization as a system." So then perhaps some short quotes taken out of context might seem contradictory, or at least at odds with other quotes. That isn't surprising. When you understand the ideas Deming presented, it's pretty clear that data is important and using data to improve performance is useful. But at the same time, there are dangers of being misled by the improper use of data. So John left a much longer comment. I'll leave it to you if you want to read the rest of John Hunter's thoughts. I consider him an expert on Dr. Deming and what Dr. Deming taught. If you want to read that full comment, go to leanblog.org/audio217. You can read the whole thing. You can find links to the Deming Institute and everything else I mentioned in this post. So as always, this has been Mark Graban. Thanks for listening.